Hi, everyone. My name is Karthik Narasimhan. I lead the research team at Sierra. And I'm super excited today to be talking to you all on TauBench, which is one of our recent efforts at benchmarking AI agents for the real world. And before I begin, I just want to state, this is a combined effort. Lots of super excellent people have worked on it, including Shinyu, Noah, and Pedram. And if you want to read up more on TauBench, we actually put it out as a paper on arXiv, so you can go and dive deeper. So before I go into what TauBench is, just a quick raise of hands. Like, how many people know what an AI agent is? OK, that's great. Actually, a lot of you. That makes my job easier. So let me just give you a quick background on where we're coming from at Sierra, and then I'll talk about TauBench. So at Sierra, what we're doing is we're building the conversational AI platform for businesses. And what that means is essentially, we're making it easy for businesses to build their own AI agents, right? So agents, autonomous systems that can interact with users, be able to converse in free-flowing natural language, and also be able to execute actions and take decisions that can help solve issues, right? So think you want to return your product, or you want to change your flight, all sorts of things. So one of the things about putting these kinds of agents in the real world is that it's actually quite hard to evaluate how well they do, right? I'm sure you all have your own use cases, and everybody's saying evals, 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 right? So one of the hardest things about building these agents and shipping them is evaluating them, right? And what I'm going to talk about today is how we are thinking about one way of using LLMs to help do so. So let me quickly run through some challenges, right? These are 3 challenges that I can point out. There may be more with evaluating AI agents, right? So first of all, if you want to put out your agent in the real world, you want these agents to be able to communicate well with humans, right? So this involves both being able to understand what the users are saying, right? They may use different tones, different styles, right? They may use Gen Z language, all sorts of things, right? So you want to be your agent to be able to understand what the humans are saying, but at the same time also communicate and generate accurate language that the humans can understand. And on top of that, you want your agents to be able to execute accurate and reliable actions, right? So whether it's an API call to return the product or change a flight and so on. But this is sort of like the basic, right? So what we want on top of this are 2 other things. So first, we want these evals to be able to measure not only first-order statistics, but also measure something more, measure the reliability of these agents, right? And I'll show you how we do that with TauBench. And on top of that, as a developer, you also want control in terms of what scenarios you can test your agent on, right? So you don't want to put these agents out in the world and then figure out, hey, what's happening? You want to be able to do that before you put these into production, right? And so we thought about all this, and in the research team, we're about developing new techniques for building these agents. And one of the things that we realized was, if you look at academic benchmarks that exist out there, research benchmarks, there was sort of a gap here, right? So there were benchmarks in 2 kinds of areas. One, dialogue systems, where people have looked at how systems behave and can have dialogue with humans. And then the other kind of side, there were these agent benchmarks where people are looking at tasks like web interaction or software engineering that doesn't really have much to do with an actual human user, right? So what we want is a combination of the 2. And TauBench is essentially one solution that we've come up to address this gap, right? So Tau here essentially is tool agent user, right? So TAU. And the benchmark's core idea is to use LLMs in the best way possible to make it easy to simulate dynamic, real-time, realistic conversations, OK? So let me just give you a quick overview of what the different components that TauBench has, right? That's the TAU, tool, agent, and user. So the agent itself, has various things like a domain policy document that tells it what and what not to do. There's tools, API, and so on. This is standard stuff. The tools environment at the bottom over here, right, is basically where you have a combination of a database and then some tools that can read to and fro as well as write to this particular database. And then the middle part here, which is the focus of this talk, is having a user which can be simulated using a scenario. So diving a bit deeper into this, right? So our user simulation basically, is using an LLM, and you can think of it as like an agent where you can use a system prompt to describe a scenario and then generate the particular user simulation that you want, right? So while previously you would have to use human live testers to do this, right? We can actually use these very good LLMs like GPT-4o and others to build this user simulator. So there's a lot of advantages to doing this, right? So it's cheap, fast. It's easy to scale to a wide range of scenarios. And the last part, which is where I'll talk about reliability, you can actually rerun the same scenario multiple times, right? So this is a more realistic assessment of how reliable the agent is, because you're able to actually test, if 10,000 users had the same question about returning their shoes, you want the agent to handle every single of those 10,000 cases. Now, of course, there's some caveats, right? So I won't go into details, but of course, simulators have their sort of issues. So very quickly, not going into details, but you can actually try out various user simulator techniques, right? So if you think about it at a high level, user simulators are essentially agents themselves, right? So you can use all the latest agent research, techniques like React, Reflection, whatever is your favorite one, to actually make this user simulator more and more complex, right? And we've seen that actually it helps with things like hallucinations and unreliable behavior. So the user simulation is one nice application of using modern LLMs. But the other thing that we found was really critical to getting TauBench right was to actually use these LLMs to scale up data generation, right? So there's sort of three stages in which we created tasks for TauBench. Stage 1 and 3 are sort of manual, but once we sort of designed the database schema and APIs and policies, we leveraged the language models like GPT-4 to really scale up and generate a lot of realistic data, right? And this is important because you want to be able to test on scenarios that are realistic and not have to hand design every single order or every single person's date of birth and things like that. So another particular case where LLMs are useful. So overall, I think I'm quite bullish on using LLMs as a way to develop these more dynamic simulated benchmarks. And I think we'll see that coming through the field a lot. So I'll just give you a quick idea of the experience we ran with TauBench, right? It is a research paper. So the main things that we evaluated were state-of-the-art LLMs with function calling or React. And we looked at two things. First is basically how well can each agent complete the task in TauBench. And the second part over here is we introduced a new metric called pass_hat_k, which essentially measures how well an agent can perform if it's asked to complete the same scenario k times, right? And we want the agent to succeed on all k scenarios to get a pass for that particular task, okay? A very quick summary of the results, right? You can read more, go more into the paper and read it. But at a high level, there's a lot of room for improvement on the benchmark itself, right? So you could see that there's a bunch of these different models. Of course, things are changing over time, right? So you may get slightly different numbers when you run it. But the high-level bit here is, there's a lot of room for improvement for these function calling and React-based agents. But the most interesting part, if you see on the bottom right, is the measure of reliability over here. So the curve, the downward curve that you see here is essentially plotting pass_hat_k as you increase k on the x-axis, right? And you can see, for almost every single agent over there, it starts off quite high when you run it once on a particular scenario. But as you rerun the same scenario multiple times, the pass_hat_k score goes down quite a bit, right? So this basically indicates how the agents may not be as reliable as you actually think if you just run it once, right? And I think this is an excellent example of where simulators can really shine, right? So imagine trying to get a human tester to run through the same scenario 32 times, right? That's not going to happen. And this type of scaling is what I'm excited to see when you use these LLM-based simulators to test agents for the real world. So that's basically it. Thank you all. If you want to play around more with TauBench, you can go and check out the code on GitHub. You can also read our blog post, and like I said, we have an archive paper out. So thank you all.